subway in New York. I'm Joe Matthew. It's good to see you. You made it to Friday, the weekend before Thanksgiving. Maybe you have a long one. I hope for your sake that you do. It's awfully quiet around here in Washington as lawmakers head home for the holiday and we wait for the big transition, which we're, of course, talking about all day long around here. Let me just answer the question that you have in mind. We don't have a Treasury Secretary pick, but we do have a new concept. Let's work with what we have, right? We're going to go to war with the army we have, seems to be the idea at Mar-a-Lago, but we might need everybody for this. It's the Treasury two-step. President-elect floating this idea of Kevin Warsh as Treasury Secretary with the understanding he would be later nominated to run the Fed when Jay Powell's term as chair ends. Scott Bessent, meantime, keep him in the House, the White House. He runs the National Economic Council. He becomes Treasury Secretary when Warsh becomes Fed chair. Nathan Dean, how did I do?
I think you did great.
Is that's really the plan here?
Well, I think that it's a plan that makes sense from President Trump's perspective because, President Trump said prior that, he's floated this idea of firing or demoting Jerome Powell at the Fed. We don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. Makes better sense just to let Powell serve out the rest of his term. But they've also floated this idea of a shadow banking Fed chairman.
That's right.
And if Kevin Warsh is now Treasury Secretary with the idea that in a year he's going to be the Fed chairman, Wall Street is going to be looking at the Department of Treasury over on over next to the White House. Yeah. They're not going to be looking down Constitution Avenue at the Fed. So It makes sense. Because with Kevin Warsh, you get somebody that Wall Street, I think, can work with, Wall Street respects, and then they move to the Fed, and then you get Scott Bessent at NEC chair to move up against somebody that Wall Street can work with. So I think this plan, if it were to go into fruition, certainly would pass the Senate. I think Wall Street would be pretty happy with it. I think a couple of folks on the populist side of the Republican Party may not be so happy with it.
Okay.
But I would also just remember, Treasury doesn't play the same amount of role that it plays in terms of tariffs like Commerce does, which is why Howard Lutnick at Commerce is much more important to President Trump's initial agenda of implementing those tariffs.
So you put yourself down at Mar-a-Lago. The president-elect was interviewing all three. It was, Rowan, Warsh, Bessent this week. He's sitting down with Bessent. It was his idea to have this shadow Fed chair, right? So, Mr. President, they start spitballing on this. I said, well, how about you? Maybe we could do that, make the Treasury Secretary be the shadow. You just hang out with me in the White House till he's done. We'll pull the trigger on this whole thing. Did they work it out together on the patio?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I wish I was on that patio, A, because of the weather, it's snowing here, but B, just to listen about how they're gaming this out. But what I will say is that President Trump wants speed. The reason why he wants these picks done and he wants to move them quickly is because every single moment that the Senate is focused on nominations, they're not focused on tax reform. And if Speaker Johnson kicks the funding fight from December into March, again, it's going to junk up a lot of President Trump's first 100 days on Capitol Hill. Right. So if they can get this plan to work and if they can get enough Republican senators to go with it, I presume that they can, then you score your idea of moving quickly, getting a shadow Fed chair, and also making Wall Street fairly comfortable with where you're going on two of the biggest picks from the economic perspective.
Meanwhile, Secretary Lutnick, assuming he's confirmed, becomes the tariff czar. They put USTR under Commerce. That's the tariff house. That's how that works. Treasury gets cover because Lutnick is doing it.
Yeah, so this is where the soap opera version of the Trump administration begins because on one hand, you're going to have President Trump pushing tariffs. Tariffs are very popular with the president. This is something he's campaigned on and most likely something that we're going to see in the first half of next year. But Wall Street, on the other hand, may not like tariffs so much. If companies like Home Depot or Nike or Adidas have to start buying a lot more expensive products from outside of the United States, Wall Street's not going to like that. So you're going to have the Treasury Secretary at one point saying, look, these stocks may be going into the red because of your tariff policy. But on the other hand, you're going to have Commerce saying, well, this is what we were elected to do. I don't envy them and how they're going to have this decision and how they're going to have to fight this out.
Boy.
But ultimately, it's going to be President Trump's decision to either direct Commerce to move forward with these tariffs or not. We will always tell our clients, though, just remember, tariffs, for the most part, come from the power of the presidency, which means you're going to see a lot of headline risk to begin. But then as the process plays out, there could be exemptions, there could be lobbying, there could be reciprocal tariff threats from China, for example. So presidents never back themselves into political back corners with tariffs. It's a long, drawn-out process as opposed to a magic wand that happens on day one.
Fascinating. Your eyebrows must have raised when you heard this idea of a crypto czar. floated. We've got no details still, at least that I've heard, on what this is, what the title really would be, what agency this person would be floating around the White House somehow. Do you know anything about it, who that would be?
No, but what we tell folks when it comes to czars is that they have fancy titles, but a lot of times they don't have huge implementation avenues. Because remember, in the crypto space, it's going to be the SEC chair and the CFTC chair that will be implementing regulations. It'll be Congress on the other hand. So think of czars, in this case, the crypto czar, think of them as cheerleaders. They're going around, they're telling folks, yes, we are working on this. We're going to work with the SEC.
This is to make the market happy.
It's to make the market happy. So, but czars are one of the most difficult positions from Washington because they can't have the power to actually implement things. They need to rely on others.
Well, meanwhile, Gary Gensler is packing up the office right now. There's a short list of about 100 people to replace him. How's this going to work?
Yeah, so, I think the SEC chair is a second-tier priority for Mar-a-Lago. The reason being is there's about 18 names I counted, which means 15 of them are probably self-promoting their own names.
18 possible
I counted
contenders.
18 names. But for the SEC chair, what we're looking at is, are you going to get a crypto pick or a Wall Street pick? The crypto pick, there's a lot of money that's gone into President Trump's campaign to ensure that crypto is a top issue, but it's not the top issue for the SEC. Are you going to get a Wall Street pick? Think of somebody that comes from the Commissioner Paul Atkins, or even who came from the cloth of Jay Clayton, the former SEC chair. Now Trump's pick to lead the SDNY. That is a capital formation pick that will be close to Wall Street. I think what will happen over at the SEC is they'll hit pause. They'll wait till about April or May. It's a second-tier pick. You'll have a 2-2.
April or May?
Yeah, I think what they're going to do is they're going to focus on other things. You'll have Commissioner Wade or Commissioner Peirce, the Republican commissioners. One of them will step up to acting chair. They'll lay out an agenda, but I don't think you're going to see this really fast deregulatory effort over at the SEC.
The crypto loves this, right? I mean, we're looking at $100,000 here. The difference since the election has been wild, and the money made. I know you're not a technical analyst here, but those who do cover the space think there's a new floor, that this idea of a national reserve has completely changed the dynamic for Bitcoin, at least. Do you see it that way?
So sort of. So right now, the United States is sitting on around 208,000 Bitcoin. So, that's a lot of cash right now. And so, Senator Lummis has proposed this bill that the United States should build a strategic reserve of about 5% of the world's Bitcoin, so the United States can own it. So we already own 208,000. So that could be packaged together, put into what they call, quote unquote, a reserve. The problem, however, is to get additionally is you're going to need appropriations from Congress to essentially direct monies to purchase Bitcoin and or the executive branch is going to have to figure out how to finagle appropriations for other things to be used for purchase for Bitcoin. It's going to get messy. And so that's why I think this bill is the most likely scenario. Certainly something that we'll be talking about next year. I don't want to say it's going to have decent chances of passage immediately, but what I would always say to the Bitcoin crowd is, yes, you're getting good sentiment right now because you have a president who is going to be very much pro-crypto, but the logistics and the specifics of what cryptocurrency regulation looks like will be more likely turning Coinbase into something like CME Group or the Intercontinental Exchange, very similar to what we see in the derivatives world today, which is not the wild, wild west.
Fascinating. Always fascinating to spend time with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. You're just back from a tour of European capitals because clients want to know what in the world is going on post-election. The great part about Nathan Dean is he's about to go on another tour of European capitals after Thanksgiving. What was the most common question, most common worry that you encountered?
So obviously the European tariffs, and our view on that is that it'll eventually come, but I think China's the highest priority. But then we got a lot of questions about the Inflation Reduction Act because there's a lot of European capex coming into the United States on these ideas that solar incentives are going to stick around. So our thought on the IRA is that even though you'll hear whispers of it being thrown into the tax reform debate, the IRA, for the most part, we think is cemented. It's $433 billion. That's cheap when you have to figure out how to pay for $4 to $4.5 trillion of tax extensions. Certain aspects of it can be cut, but ultimately, there's a lot of European money going in from the industrial base into southern Trump states like Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas that's building solar farms and solar plants, and local politicians do not want to see those 700 jobs disappear because of something that's happening.
Solar stocks have fallen off a cliff since the election.
Yeah, I mean, but,
could be an opportunity.
It could be an opportunity.
Great to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for always being great. That's Nathan Dean, of course, you know that, with his patented fleece vest right here in the flesh. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington.